The Darkest Dungeon 2 is finally out, and we have one heck of an analysis to go over. And whether or not this is a successful follow-up, a great game on its own, or does it get kind of stuck in the mud along the journey? If you're going into the Darkest Dungeon 2 with any skill or knowledge from the first one, I can tell you right away that it is not going to help you. A major aspect of this game's kind of MO has been to just completely upend and restructure everything there is about the first game, and trust me, that is going to come up quite a bit in this video. So our story is kind of a soft reboot, where the world is once again coming to an end. And in order to save it, we're going to ride out into the countryside and take on the horrors of the mountain, and as Wayne June says, the Darkest Dungeon, which unfortunately I can't get my voice that deep. Now, the first game was built on a grand campaign structure, and what that meant was characters, trinkets, any negative or positive quirks would carry over from map to map. This gave the game a very high stakes, high risk, high reward feel to it. Losing a fully equipped party is just like taking a nuclear bomb to your campaign. And it gave the game a very polarized difficulty spike. Anyone who made it to the actual Darkest Dungeon can certainly attest to how much harder and frustrating that was compared to the rest of the game. And I believe that was one of the influences for changing the structure this time, as Darkest Dungeon 2 is now a roguelite style game. The game itself is split into 5 acts or confessions. Your mission is to get from beginning to end with your party alive and sane to defeat the act's boss. Beat them, and you will unlock the next level or the next campaign. Now, win or lose, you will earn candles, which is the game's persistent currency and is used for a very, and I do mean very extensive unlocking system. This will get you new classes, new trinkets, items, persistent upgrades, and even additional difficulty modifiers if you find the game to be too easy. So, with that said, let's talk a little bit more about combat and class design, because this is definitely going to be a major factor into whether or not you're going to enjoy this game. All, or shall I say, the majority of the classes from the first one are back, and each one has been redesigned with new skills, as well as a complete restructuring of the skills that have made a return. When you choose a character or choose party members, they'll each come with a random assortment of quirks. Some really good, some not so good, and some that you're just going to probably restart the entire game if they start with them. A new feature are paths, which act as class-wide modifiers. Each character will get, I believe, 3 of them, at least at the time of being released, and this is a great way of further differentiating the different classes from each other, and from even the same version. For instance, the Plague Doctor has the Surgeon path that turns her knife into a powerhouse of bleed and major damage. Now, with that said, the majority of these skills are locked, and the only ways to unlock them are to find hero shrines during a campaign, complete the challenge, or learn a little bit more about the character's backstory, and you'll get access to more of their skills. And again, trust me, that's going to come back up when we get to the second half of this video. Now, I really do like the class designs, and again, this leads into this kind of new token-based system. The tokens basically represent all the buffs and debuffs that can befall a character, and this one is full of them. A huge change to the structure of combat in Darkest Dungeon 2 is that every skill now has a 100% base chance of hitting, so you will never have to worry, at least without any modifiers, a skill missing when you need it to. However, all the different buffs and debuffs can have huge changes to how skills behave. Almost every skill in the entire game has specific conditionals based on the character using them or the character who's being affected by them. Many classes, such as the Occultist, Vestal, and even stuff like the Man-at-Arms, have special tokens that can activate or proc off of their skills. Target is a very popular one. The target debuff, when it is used on certain enemies or when it's combined with certain skills, will apply a combo effect. This can give a skill a guaranteed crit. It could make it do additional damage, greater chance of debuffs going off, and so on and so forth. And what I'm describing here, this is just like the basic level. There is a lot more going on, and it becomes a far more interesting challenge of party dynamics and skill interaction as you unlock all the classes and their respective skills, not to mention, of course, the different paths as well. Now, this also gets factored into a very greatly redesigned trinket and item system. Items in this one are no longer kind of used as like a situational puzzle thing. You're never have to worry about figuring out does a torch or an antidote work on a curio ever again. Items in this game fall into kind of two distinct groupings. You have the items that can be used during combat. So these are stuff like anti-fire damage, antidote, or giving you like a specific buff. And then you have items that can be used at the inn or kind of like back at your hub area. Now, the inn items are very important because not only can they provide healing and sanity recovery, but they can also provide a buff that will last until you get to the next inn or the next part of the campaign. And like I said, you'll be unlocking a lot of these items as you play through. Now, trinkets are far better and far more interesting in this one, and I will say like one of the biggest like thumbs up for me about this game are the trinket redesigns. Trinkets, once again, come in different varieties and different rarities. Some are more generalized, while others are specifically for a set class. There are also new trinkets that synergize based on different groupings, such as the stainless trinkets that you get from the various cultists. There are trinkets that will only work if, let's say, you have a specific item equipped to a character as well. And one other thing about the items is that items do not cost you a character's turn. So this sets up even more dynamics of using characters to either heal or recover or apply an additional debuff to an enemy before causing their attack. The trinkets are definitely a major factor in success or failure. They are really the major X factor as to how a run is going to grow and evolve over the course of playing. You see, character unlock skills only occur, or once they're unlocked, they're there forever, and you can swap between your 5 active whenever you're not in combat. You no longer have multiple levels of upgrading weapons, armor, and skills. Beating certain fights will unlock mastery points, and every skill basically has an upgraded version. The upgraded version can either do more, add more effects, or kind of raise the potency or even change some aspects of the skill. And some of these skills in this game feel like night and day differences when you get them upgraded. But of course, you don't have to make that choice as to which ones you want to upgrade at any given time. Now, one returning factor, of course, is stress damage and character relationships. Stress is now tied to basically just 10 pips of your stress bar. And stress can grow from missing attacks, getting hit, and of course when enemies do those loving sanity affecting attacks. When a character hits 10, they will either have a meltdown or gain resolve. And you do not have to worry about characters having heart attacks and just instantly dying anymore. But you now have to worry about characters backstabbing each other, literally, during a run. As your party interacts with each other, they will gain positive and negative tokens respectively, and each character in your party has a different relationship with the other characters. If you gain enough positive tokens, there's a chance that they will become friends, and what that means is that 2 randomly chosen skills from each, or 1 from each character, will have a benefit with the other character if they're used. Conversely, if they hate each other, then those skills will gain a debuff, and this can become very bad if, let's say, your ranged character hates your melee, and when they each use their respective skills, it causes the other one to become blind, which will reduce their chance at hitting. because that certainly didn't happen to me during a few of these runs. But again, the greater focus on kind of skill dynamics and the token buff slash debuffing system really changes how you have to approach each combat. In the first game, the boss fights were kind of more puzzle-like in that respect, in you having to figure out what was the boss's special tricks and building a party around that. Here, it feels like everything has been given a really big shot in the armor of complexity. Many minor enemies have some incredibly nasty debuffs or can support their friends, and if you don't know how to properly deal with them, fights can drag on. And I do mean drag on in some cases. So, with all that said, I do love that basically my explanation of the mechanics of this game is about the length of a full review of some of my other videos here on the channel. But there is just that much more to go over. But with that said, I'm going to take a quick break, fill up my drink, and take a rest at the end. And when we come back, I want to talk about whether or not Darkest Dungeon 2 is a better game compared to the first one, and does it perfectly stick the landing or not with its redesign. If you're interested in my thoughts on design, then be sure to check out my game design books. For entry-level students, we have 20 Essential Games to Study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with more coming soon. I will be letting some B-roll play, as there is a lot for me to muse over here with the game. From a mechanical and system perspective, I think Darkest Dungeon 2 is a far superior game to the first one. The redesigned classes, new paths, and just again, giving characters more involved in different roles for your team adds up to some very enjoyable combat and team dynamics. However, the pacing and structure of the game don't quite mesh as well. As I said in the first part, the problem that the first game faced was that as it went on, it became more and more punishing and frustrating to play. Losing a full team of characters at the very end of the game is just a horrifically bad experience, coupled with the act of having to rebuild that team over many hours. What the developers did here is that the difficulty spikes and difficulty curve of Darkest Dungeon 2 is reversed. This is a game where the opening is far more frustrating and difficult to play compared to the later half of it. And a lot of that stems from the roguelite redesign, and how I'm going to probably cause some trouble with the statement and say that this is perhaps one of the worst examples of roguelite gameplay I've seen in a long time. You see, a huge factor of whether or not you're going to have a chance at winning is the unlocks, specifically those that will add the new skills to characters and even getting some better trinkets and combat items. As we've talked about, each character you start with, that is the Man-at-Arms, Grave Robber, Highwayman, and Plague Doctor, they only have their 5 base skills. The rest of the characters must be unlocked using the candles, and then the rest of the skills must be unlocked using the hero shrines. But you see, the problem is that the kind of usefulness and utility of each class is wildly different based on where they are and what unlocks you have for them. Some classes just don't feel right to use until you've unlocked all their skills. The Runaway in particular just doesn't feel like an adequate member of the team at the start, as they're kind of half front row, half back row, instead of feeling like a cohesive whole. The Hellion, as another example, really comes to life once you get her adrenaline surge. As another point, the Occultist, whose now main element is to build up this kind of otherworldly force to charge some of his attacks and more damaging debuffs. All those great debuffs are not available at the start. You are only given 1 hex and a few attacks. And again, it doesn't feel right to use some of these classes. And it is that big difference once you get a character fully unlocked. The Man-at-Arms comes to life once you unlock his ability to repose and taunt enemies. But that means that for the first few hours of this game, you're going to be very much shackled by what you can and can't do, and this becomes even more frustrating compounded by the token system. Because enemies have specific debuffs, specific ways of interacting, you need skills or, in respect, items to counter that. If you're up against a party that, let's say, all their members gain dodge after they use an attack, and you don't have anyone or any items to counter that, that battle will go on for a long time. And you're going to find that some fights just don't feel good to go up against, simply by the fact that you don't have the means of stopping them. Once you unlock abilities to raise your character's defense or debuff the enemy, you can then start to play around these abilities. But for so much of the early game, you are just not going to have those tools. And to make things even worse, this is very much a game where the majority of your deaths are going to come down to information, or should I say lack of information, as you play it. Every area in the game is built around the enemies being strong against a specific type of damage and performing a certain type of damage on their own. What that means for you is that, unlike other roguelikes and roguelites, where the party dynamics and the strategies that you employ evolve over the course of the run, here, how your run is going to be dictated is based entirely on what you choose at the very beginning. If you take a blight-focused party into kind of like the farmlands where everyone is incredibly resistant to blight, good job or good luck fighting that boss, or taking fire to the fire area. And as a new player, you are going to run into wall after wall of basically dying due to lack of knowledge. And speaking of, as the game goes on, the run length gets longer. The very first confession is maybe hour 20, give or take. Once you get past that, each run is going to probably be at minimum 2 hours. And there really isn't much you can do to speed run through this game. And this also has a factor when it comes to the boss designs. The bosses, or the confession bosses, are probably the most puzzly, and they are again very reminiscent of the final areas or the actual Darkest Dungeon from the first game. You have to build a party specifically to counter the weirdness and the gimmicks of those fights. Do that, and the fight is very easy. Don't do it, and you just wasted an hour, half to 2 hours of your time. And it becomes very annoying. There are some major pain points with how an entire run is basically determined by 5 minutes at the very end. And that takes me to boss number 3, because I think this represents kind of Darkest Dungeon 2 at its worst. It is a very gimmick-centric fight that even if you know exactly what to do, you can still lose it simply by the fact that you don't have the right characters or the right skills in effect to take it down. It is, I think, not only just one of the worst boss fights I've played in a while, I think this may be one of the worst boss fights in the last like 10 to 13 years. I could do like a 20 to 30 minute design video breaking down everything that's wrong with it. And just for the heck of it, maybe I can get pay Wayne June to do the voiceover for it, just to drive the point home. But the fight represents, in a way, a good example of the difficulty issues that Red Hook has with these games. They want to make them very difficult to play, very challenging, but they also want to give you all kinds of crazy abilities, interesting matchups, synergies, team dynamics. But when you design bosses that are hard-locked in terms of the specific skills or the specific strategies that you need, it makes it all the more frustrating to go up against them. Where a team that is dominating 90 to 95% of the entire game, simply the run ends because it doesn't counter that one boss fight or that one fight. And there aren't other ways of going around it. And I think a really good comparison would be comparing some of these bosses and just the difficulty design of Darkest Dungeon 2 to the likes of, say, Limbus Company and Labia Runa from Project Moon. Project Moon designed some very nasty bosses, and they are very puzzle-like as well. But you are given the information way ahead of time in terms of how to fight them. And there are oftentimes different options that you can take in order to get through them. So while the boss does have these kinds of gotchas, or, if you do this, it will punish you, you have other ways of getting around it, and half the fun is figuring out said ways. Here, these bosses are basically, it will do this one exact thing. Do you have the answer for it? Yes/no. And the answer is no, then the fight is going to be difficult to borderline impossible. And like I said, part of the issues with the roguelike nature of this game is that the opening hours, and for a new player, it is going to be horribly frustrating to play this one. And I would say the first 3 to 5 hours, give or take, is going to be hell for you. And my biggest advice is to not even worry about doing the confessions, just focus on unlocking all the characters and unlocking all their abilities at the hero shrines before you play the game for real. And unfortunately, that's not a good way of designing a roguelite. My suggestion would have been that all characters have their skills available from the start, but then all the paths and trinkets and passive upgrades at the kind of altar, or the persistent element, those are tied, or they're kind of gated by the hero shrine challenges. Because again, it is such that big of a deal. When you get the occultist's raining star or burning star power, he really comes to life as a damage dealer. But it also requires you get to 5 of the hero shrines accomplished before you do that. And I would really like, in the future, to see more of a focus on rewarding or adding in interesting challenges or new ways of playing. I would love to see more paths, again, more classes if they ever make their return, and even more ways of differentiating or changing the difficulty. Like I said in the first part, you can unlock these additional flames, which act as difficulty spikes or difficulty modifiers, but it would be cool to see, again, more challenges and more rewards along that front. So with that said, one other issue that I have with this game is from a UI perspective. I feel that the UI is cumbersome in some areas where it shouldn't or it doesn't need to be. The whole relationship system, that despite being so pivotal to whether or not you're going to have a chance in some areas, or for your characters to just, again, literally backstab each other, it is a pain to view it in the different menus. And it would have been great when you're using the in items, that you can see characters' relationship bonuses one to the other. The whole in system also feels like it takes way too many steps, in my opinion, to accomplish simple tasks. And again, I think that's a good explanation of this game. That it's not an incredibly hard game to play, but it can become very hard to parse what is it you're doing or how to improve at it. And as I've said, for the people who learn this game, if you make it past that 3 to 5 hour hump that's in the game right now, then this is an incredibly well developed and interestingly designed RPG. But again, I can guarantee you that a lot of people are going to check out this one before they get to see what the Darkest Dungeon 2 has to offer. Like with games along these lines, they have promised continued support and continued development, so there is that possibility that by the time you're watching this, that my entire rant on the Act 3 boss may be completely unwarranted. There may be new stuff coming. I know they've already have plans to add in the Collector, because what this game needs is more difficulty at the moment, at least for people starting out. So to wrap up this review / mini essay on the Darkest Dungeon 2, this is a fantastic game if you can get past that initial hump. If you're someone who loved the first game, then I don't think this one may scratch that same itch. Again, going from being a grand campaign to a roguelite. But if you are someone who liked the concepts and the theming and the mood of the first game, but found it too punishing to play over like the long run of a campaign, then the biter-sized versions of this game may work for you. And again, I would definitely recommend, if you haven't looked at the Black Reliquary, to check that one out as well, as it is very much kind of like a conversion mod that acts as a soft sequel by fans to the first game. So this is definitely one that I am curious, for those of you who play the game, what did you think of the Darkest Dungeon 2? Let me know in the comments down below, and also make sure to tell me that you beat every confession boss first try with no deaths, and all characters didn't even take any damage during those fights. I would like to thank the developer for giving me a press key to check out this one and rant about here on this video. If you'd like me to tickle your game for a future video and stream, please reach out. Do all the YouTubing stuff people tell you to do. Be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.